There's a kind of finance bro on Wall Street that doesn't bother trading stocks or projecting earnings. Instead, they buy entire companies. And they're not doing it to make steady 5% returns. They want to buy the company, fire half the staff, triple the profits, and then sell it back to the market at a premium as if they're business geniuses. What kind of finance bro are we talking about?
And his name is
Private equity. PE firms wear a mask claiming to be buying a company in order to turn it around, bring it back to its glory days, and get it running like a well-oiled machine once again. The truth is, they don't give a fuck whether it lives or dies. And that's because they're able to structure their deals in a way that makes them money no matter what. How's this possible? Let's dive into the world of private equity and find out. Private equity is exactly what it sounds like. Private, as in not publicly traded, and equity, as in ownership in a company. So private equity firms buy entire companies, either companies that are already private or they take them private by buying out all of their public shares. And just like every other Wall Street scam artist, they're rarely doing this with their own money. They go and raise money from rich investors, pension funds, university endowments, insurance companies, rich people, and honestly, whoever else will give it to them. Why would you risk your own money when you could risk someone else's, am I right? Anyways, what they're supposedly trying to do is finding underperforming companies which they can then turn around and improve, meaning they can sell the company for a few years later for a massive profit. At least that's the theory. It's honestly very analogous to flipping houses. You spot a house on the public market that's not in the greatest condition but has a bunch of potential, you fix her up and you sell her for a profit. PE firms claim to do that exact same thing, but do so with multi-billion-dollar companies. So where's the evil in all of this? Well, it's in how they do it. So how do they buy these companies? It's through something called a leveraged buyout, or an LBO. The word leveraged is just a finance bro way of saying we use a shitload of debt. So they borrow as much money as humanly possible to buy the company. Why would you want to do that? Because the sneaky pricks go and put the debt on the company's book, not on theirs.
Oh my god! Even though they're from... Oh my god!
So let's say they want to buy a company called ABC for $1 billion. They need to put in around 20% equity, so 200 mil. Then they borrow the remaining 800 mil and use ABC's assets and future cash flows as collateral. So for 200 mil, they now own a $1 billion company who they've just loaded up with a bunch of debt. Again, using our house buying analogy to illustrate how crazy this is. You save up a 20% deposit for a house, you take out a mortgage for the remaining 80%, but instead of you owing the debt, you say the house owes the debt. Now, it sounds ridiculous when you put it in those terms, but seeing as businesses are legal entities, they can obviously take on debt of their own. And so that's exactly what the PE firms do. Buy companies for cheap and then load them up with debt. So now what happens? They start creating value. But a private equity firm's idea of creating value is the same as a file's idea of a good time. Completely twisted. Creating value for PE firms means they fire a bunch of employees, sometimes thousands. After Bain and KKR assumed control of Toys R Us, more than 30,000 employees ended up losing their jobs. More on this later though. How else do they create value? They stop investing in long-term projects. They raise prices, they squeeze suppliers, they delay maintenance, and they do whatever else they can to make the numbers go up in the short term, regardless of whether the company survives in the long term. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, so they basically buy a company for cheap, seeing as they mainly use debt that they don't have to pay back, and then completely destroy the company's long-term value. Which they do, but how exactly does that make them any money? Well, first I'm going to quickly go over the technicalities behind how they make their money, and then we'll dive into a bunch of examples to illustrate how they come out on top, no matter the scenario. There's three main ways these guys make money. The first two are fairly normal, it's the usual management and performance fees, but the last one is where you'll be wondering how the f*** is this even legal? So, management fees. Basically the easiest way to make money in the world. Similar to hedge funds, you charge a flat 2% fee simply for existing. So if you manage to raise a $10 billion fund, you're getting paid 200 mil a year, even if you lose money. Wicked. Then we've got the performance fees, and this is where they can start making big money. Let's say they actually manage to do their job properly. They buy a shitty company, turn it around and sell it for a profit. They'll usually take around 20% of that profit. And similar to venture capital, this profit is known as carried interest, or just carry. And finally, we've got dividend recaps. This shit sounds illegal. So our PE firm is buying ABC for $1 billion. We've outlaid 200 mil of our own money, and now we own the company. So what do? We go and take out some more debt on behalf of ABC, let's say 250 mil, and we pay ourselves a $250 million special dividend. So for an initial $200 million outlay of capital, we now have $250 million in cash, a $1 billion company, and no real obligation to pay back the debt we've just taken out on behalf of ABC. So now we've already made a profit on the deal, and we still own the company.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
If this is how private equity works, and people know how it works, then why would anyone lend money to a company that's owned by a private equity fund? Especially since it's probably overloaded with debt and probably doesn't have a very long lifespan as it is. Great question. A lot of the loans used in dividend recaps are high yield debt, also known as junk bonds, so they know the risk and get paid for it in the form of higher interest rates. Junk bonds can be anywhere from a couple of percentage points to even double or triple the yield of high-grade bonds. The other interesting thing is, the bank is giving out the debt. They're not giving out loans with their own money. That would be silly. They offload their loans to investors and take fees for closing the deal. See, everyone in finance is playing hot potato with risk. They take it from one person, pass it to someone else, and make money in between. So, a quick recap summarized in a table. Their management fees pay them 2% of assets under management every year just for existing, which is evil because they get paid even if they lose everything. Their performance fees make them 20% of profits, but only after a sale, so now they're incentivized to pump and dump companies as soon as possible. And their dividend recap means they're literally getting paid to loot companies. Let's go over a couple of scenarios to show you just how rigged the game is and how PE firms will never quite lose. PE firm buys ABC for $1 billion using $200 million equity and $800 million debt. They fire staff, which decreases wages, kill long-term investment, which decreases costs, and forget about maintenance, again, decreasing costs. So on paper, this company is shitting profit left, right, and center. It's the equivalent of getting catfished on Tinder by a fat girl with a pretty face. Eventually, some poor sucker swipes right and buys the company for $1.5 billion a couple years later. They pay back the $800 million debt and pocket the $700 million profit. This is the fairy tale scenario. It does happen, but not very often. Same starting point, $1 billion company, $800 million debt, $200 million equity. But now the PE firm does a dividend recap. They borrow $300 million on behalf of the company and pay it to themselves as a special dividend. So now, they've already pulled out $300 million cash. They still technically own the company, but the company is now even more debt-laden and financially fragile. And so eventually the company goes bankrupt. Oh no, the $200 million equity we put in is gone. Yeah, but who cares? The PE firm already pulled out more than they put in. They never had to repay the company's debt, and they also got paid management fees. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention before that they'll also get the company they purchased to pay them fees? They'll charge monitoring fees, which is basically a consultancy fee, a transaction fee, literally paying themselves for completing the acquisition, and honestly, any other fee they can slap on. Breakup fees, restructuring fees, exit fees. If it's a verb in the dictionary, PE firms have figured out how to charge a fee for it. How about some examples of companies they've murdered in recent history? In 2005, KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado teamed up to buy the company for $6.6 billion through a leveraged buyout. The company went from selling toys to servicing nearly $400 million a year in interest payments. It couldn't invest in online retail, it couldn't lower prices, it couldn't breathe. What it could do, however, was pay its new owners. The PE firms charged the company millions in transaction fees just for doing the deal, monitoring fees for hanging around, and advisory fees for advising. By the time it collapsed in 2017, more than 33,000 workers had lost their jobs. Collectively, they begged for $75 million severance. The firms refused. The executives, though, got $16 million in bonuses. Or take Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia. It was a 171-year-old hospital that provided care to some of the poorest residents in Philly. In 2018, Paladin Healthcare swooped in and bought it. But not just the hospital, they split off the land underneath it into a separate real estate deal. Why? So they could let the hospital die and sell the land for a premium. They slashed staff, delayed payments, and neglected basic operations. Only a year later did the hospital shut down. Over 500 doctors and 800 nurses lost their jobs, and tens of thousands of low-income Philadelphians lost access to emergency care. And then during COVID, the city begged to lease the empty hospital to treat patients. Paladin wanted $1 million a month in rent. They didn't buy the hospital to run it. They bought it to gut it, flip the land, and let the rest rot. Or this one in the healthcare space where people literally died. You might know David Rubenstein. You guys like finance. You've probably watched some of his interviews with the big dogs. He chairs the Carlyle Group. In 2007, they bought Manorcare, one of the largest nursing home chains in the United States, for $6.3 billion. They loaded it with $4.8 billion in debt, gutted the staff, and started extracting money. Over the next few years, they pulled out more than $1.3 billion in dividends and fees, even as patient care quality plummeted. Patients were left unattended, basic hygiene was ignored, people literally died from easily preventable infections and bed sores. By 2018, they filed for bankruptcy, but Carlyle had already left the building with all the cash.
Bye, have a great time.
You want one more? I want one more. These evil fuckers should be exposed. Ever heard of Mervyn's? It was a department store chain with around 30,000 employees and some decent real estate. In 2004, a trio of private equity firms bought it for $1.25 billion. They immediately split it into two pieces, the retail business and the real estate. Then what did they do? Well, seeing as they owned both companies, they raised the rent on their own stores and extracted over $400 million in rent payments. Soon, Mervyn's collapsed, employees lost their jobs, and the real estate was able to be sold separately as it was owned by a separate company. See, these guys go into deals acting like angels sent from God himself. We're going to help you guys turn it around. We'll optimize processes and provide synergistic alliances to improve efficiencies. All they're really doing is thinking about how to cut you up and hang you out to dry while they make as much money as possible. If you had a spare minute, I want to talk about something I've been working on real quick. I started this channel because I recognize that too many of us go into university and then our careers without knowing basically anything about the careers we're choosing. This channel was meant to help provide people with more info on different career types. I've recently started working with a couple of psychologists to build a web app that helps you to 1. Choose a career based on your psychological profile and personality traits, and 2. Provide a roadmap as to how you can start learning about that career and gaining relevant skills. So it's something like this. First, you take a psychometric test. Then it matches your psychological profile and personality type to specific careers using government collected data over the last 27 years. And then provides you with a roadmap to explore which gives you more info to get you learning skills relevant to your career path. I've already begun on the building process of this application, but I wanted to try and validate my idea by sharing it with you guys. Is this something you or someone you know might be interested in? Would it have been useful to you during those final years of school before you had to choose your university major? Would you have ever paid for a service like this? I've got a fairly solid idea of the problems I think the app should solve in my own head, but I'm very open to hearing your ideas and criticisms and would love to hear them down below in the comments. Anyways, don't want to dive too deep into it and take up your time. Let me know what other content you guys are wanting me to make. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.